Oh, hold on. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. But if the virtues in the many fields of knowledge all are steps in the path of omniscience, may these arise in the clear mirror of intellect, O Manjushri. Please accomplish this. Good evening, welcome. It's wonderful to think I see you. So tonight we'll go through the Yogacara tenets from the book by Westerhoff called The Golden Age of Indian Buddhist Philosophy, Key Yogacara Concepts. I'll start off with Chitta Mantra, and Chris will jump in whenever you like, please, and then he'll go into the three natures and so forth, or Ali Vishnana rather, and then we'll see what happens from there. I think I'll do three natures and I'll do self-awareness. So we're on page
168.
Thank you, sir. 168 of the text. He says in 169, the Yogacara thinkers have developed a variety of arguments to deny the existence of material objects. Later he points out that they don't actually deny, in some cases they don't deny the existence of material objects, but they don't support the assertion of them. But amongst the denial of them, we can distinguish three main ways or groups correlated to three epistemic instruments, pramana. Interesting translation of pramana. Arguments relating to the possibility of inferring material objects, arguments relating to their being established by spiritual authority, accepted by the Buddhists, and arguments concerning the possibility of perceiving. These are the standard three means of pramana, valid cognition, in the Buddhist tradition, with scriptural authority being actually not held to be fully authoritative. And he starts off with comparing, using the analogy of the dream, that in the dream world we can't tell the difference between what's real and not real, or let's say that differently. We accept what we experience in dreams as being truly existent from its own side, and we have no valid basis for thinking that the waking state is any different. Where in dreams we think things are real, and in non-dreams we think things are real. And why should we think that we're right in one case, or in both cases? And he uses this, he notes this famous experiment that is performed in a laboratory setting where we have 3 cups of water, and 1 cup is given to the devas of the god realm, one cup to the hungry ghost and another cup to a member of the hell realm who are subjects in the experiment in the laboratory. And they all see them as different substances. I don't really like this one. What do you guys think of this one? The problem I find is that I don't know that we all accept that there are hell beings and hungry ghosts and things like that. But I think it's possible to use things that we do accept as to come to the same conclusion that, like, we view water as something to drink. Fish view it as air, like you fly through it. And there's small little insects that view water as ground. They walk on it. And so each being, type of beings, different beings have very different experiences of different phenomena according to their perceptual makeup. And there's no absolutely true, unique, conclusive way that things can be proved to be that stands for all creatures. Chris?
So the Bodhicitta Vivarana, which is ascribed to Nagarjuna, I'm looking at footnote 57, mentions the example of the body of a woman seen as a potential lover by a man, a walking corpse by an ascetic, and something to eat by a dog. So another example of the way a single thing can be perceived very differently.
Does that do it for you? Does that have the same import?
Not quite as as the other examples, but
I
I
find
think
that one to be pretty
I
weak.
think the idea here is that the way we perceive things is very much motivated by our sense faculties and sort of our prerogatives as different types of beings. And
So a dog doesn't see a person as whatever it was. Example of a body of a woman. Dogs don't see a body of a woman as, like, to see it as something to eat doesn't mean that they see it in a different way than other beings see it.
mhm.
It means that they think about it in a different way.
You could use
I don't
taste.
like that example.
Derek, you could use taste. Because
Concerning which there's no disagreement.
Hmm.
I was
Yeah,
saying you could use taste.
I'm tasting.
Some people like cheese, others can't stand it. Some people like dark chocolate, others don't like it.
Does that
There's,
really prove that objects are mentally created? Again, that doesn't
well,
do
it just shows
anything.
that people can perceive things through the taste very differently, and that there's no necessarily fixed taste that
I think on
we're,
one hand you have preferences in taste. Maybe something more interesting would be like there's that gene that makes cilantro taste like soap, which is, truly a difference in sensation, right? If you have the gene, it tastes like soap. If you don't, it tastes like cilantro, I'm told. Um, and your preferences have nothing to do with it.
Right.
It's a
That
different
has
kind of
more
perception.
weight. Similar to colorblind, where you see different
Sure.
light waves as different in different ways. He next references the fact that we can't experience anything that we can't experience. How did that go for those of you who are with me on page 170? The first full paragraph, apart from the argument from illusion and considerations of how much our sensory capacities influence our perceptions, we sometimes find reference to a third argument called Sahopalambana Niyama, the restriction to invariable co-cognition developed in detail by Dharmakirti. Objects of awareness and acts of awareness always go together. You never have one without the other. You never have an act of awareness without an object of awareness. And you might argue that, well, people hallucinate all sorts of things without there being an object of awareness in that case. So what would be the object of awareness that rises with invariable concomitance with a hallucination? We can never catch any object in an unperceived state. We can never perceive what we can't perceive. What do you think about things you know nothing about?
I actually find this argument compelling. The idea that there's no way of getting any sense of anything you might perceive outside of your own perception. There's no you have no access to any third party witness to anything at all. You
So,
can resort to maybe different ways of measuring. You can set up your Ring camera. The Ring camera is looking at the thing, but then you have to look at the Ring camera feed to get it. So there's no way of getting out of, your perceptual system is sort of a closed loop. There's no getting out of it to determine something exists outside of that perceptual system.
you guys convinced so far with these three arguments? Anybody a firm believer in non-existence of external phenomena here so far? We'll keep going.
I found, though, I do think that what was helpful in some ways was understanding that they weren't necessarily, as you mentioned before, definitively saying there is nothing there, but they're basically opening the door to that possibility and giving some good logic for that possibility, but that in some cases they're not definitively asserting it. I liked, what you were saying, where what was the other way you worded it, and um,
Yeah.
not assert whatever anyway. I think that's helpful too, is that rather than just saying it's not there, it's like there's at least reason to believe that there's another way of understanding it.
Yeah, they developed a variety of arguments to deny the existence of material objects. So the other alternative is they have arguments to um, undermine the belief in external objects.
But do they have arguments that prove there are no external objects?
That's the key question, right?
Can
Yeah,
you
which
actually
is
prove
different.
that?
Yeah.
Because it
Well, so
gets
then we
back
have
to that knowing, it gets back to that thing that we can't know something that isn't going through our, perceptual or knowledge process. And so in a way we're kind of bound into, there isn't a definitive way to do that as far as I know.
And I think Westerhoff wants to make that argument, and he does later in the chapter, is that it's tempting to want to frame these, I think is the way, Cynthia, you've been framing it, of, well, it's not necessarily saying material objects don't exist, just that we can't perceive them. But the next step is, what grounds would we have for introducing the existence of anything that we can't perceive? That those two arguments might not be as far apart as we'd like for them to be.
right. They're very close, in fact, I think. So then he takes on the argument, well, the Buddha spoke about objects as if such things existed. And we have the introduction or the reintroduction of the idea of teachings that are interpretable and not definitive, and teachings that are definitive and not interpretable, which is a matter of interpretation, which you consider to be which. And so the Madhyamakas say that when the Buddha spoke about things as if they were existing like skandhas and things like that, that was interpretable and meant to lead one towards the understanding of the emptiness of skandhas. And so the fact that the Buddha talks about phenomena as if they externally existed is not conclusive scriptural support for the external existence of objects. So dispensing with that possible situation. And then
Hey,
the
Derek,
most,
your Zoom link just came through at 8:01 p.m. Just to let you know.
it did that last week too. Yeah.
Do you do any other of
So
your
I sent it.
messages have a 1 hour time lag, or is this the only one?
Yeah, it's the only one that I know of. I should do like a time. Afterwards, I'll do a time check. So I sent
Maybe
it
you
three
should
times.
start a new email thread instead of
I was
replying
gonna
to
do
this
that.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna do that. Maybe it's because I don't believe in external objects as being verifiable. Finally, they get down to something substantial in terms of inference at the bottom of 171. Let's see, sort of in the context of that paragraph. He says, even if the previous argument about the difficulties of inferring the existence of external objects goes through what? We still have the authority of the straightforward interpretation of the Buddha's own discourses to vouch for them. You know, that's the lightness argument. You take the sort of light, easiest way of understanding something as opposed to the convoluted. At this point, a Yogacaran response, the Buddha could not have meant his talk about matter literally, since when we analyze our best theories of matter, they turn out to be internally contradictory. And this then goes through the whole contradictory nature of matter, of being made of atoms that we can't perceive, that are partless and have no way of occupying space or joining with other particles and conglomerating. And yet we see forms that have no resemblance to atoms. And so the forms are certainly not in the atoms. The forms are clearly projected by our mind. So that's pretty clear. So what is the basis for believing that there's something in the atoms that makes up the forms? I think that's probably the most conclusive
But
way of
even
this.
then, like when you talk about quark, it's top quark, bottom quark. Again, it's just descriptions of something, but we don't, there is still no object there, even though we say, well, these are the fundamental 17 particles. You look at the descriptions of, and they're just positive, negative, up, down. It's just more descriptions based on our perceptions. So yeah, it's pretty funny actually.
That seems to
It's
be
like
the
people
most
keep doing the
convincing
same thing
way of
over and
going
over
about
again. No,
this.
no, it is there. No, it is because
But so what do people think of this?
I think this is an argument we've seen a lot of. The impossibility of building a thing with parts out of a thing without parts, or maybe a little more clearly, building something with dimensionality out of something without any dimension. I really enjoyed this next one about light and shade, and how could how could things without different sides cast shadows? I thought
On
I'll
the
just
on
read.
the part on the
Can I just
ad
read this
on the
paragraph?
on the
I
atomic level, sure.
Yeah, I thought this was just sort of delightful. This is the second full paragraph on page 172. A related difficulty can be expressed with reference to light and shade. If one atom blocks the light falling on another atom so that the other atom is in the shading atom will have a light side and a dark side, and thereby two distinct parts. For if it did not, the back of the shading atom would be as bright as the front, where the light touches it. And so the shaded atom behind it would actually be in the light. Therefore, if we postulate partless atoms, it seems impossible to account for the familiar optical phenomenon such as shade, a consideration that counts against adopting such a theory in the first place. I hadn't seen that one before, and I thought that was yeah, kind of delightful.
It kind of doesn't make sense though, because at that level, light isn't continuous. It's photons, or whether they're waves or particles. So it's not that there's light falling across an atom and an atom casts a shadow. There may be photons bouncing off of it and stuff, but it's at that level, there's no such thing as light and shade. That doesn't even make sense.
I agree.
Well, you still have the idea of the light photons hitting one side of the atom and not going through it, right? So there has to be some dimensionality. I mean, it then is more similar to the previous argument about,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
But
not, it doesn't
I
introduce
think we have to be
anything.
careful about not getting too anachronistic here. I'm not sure that's how anyone in ancient India was talking about photons.
No, that's true, but I don't think they made this argument in ancient India, did they?
Yeah, I'm not sure where if he's drawing on any particular text or this is his own argument.
Because they didn't talk about
Seen this
atoms
before.
either.
They didn't talk about light in this way. I don't ever remember seeing them talk about light in such a way as a thing. They don't have light as not a dharma. Okay, so on 173, we think the first paragraph, we think the strongest argument in favor of material objects is neither the fact they can be inferred on the basis of our best theories, nor that the Buddha said there are such things, but that we can continuously and unambiguously observe them through our senses. Yet the Yogacharan will object that such sensory experiences are possible without the existence of external objects. Suppose you believe that external objects such as a cup exist because the cup is perceived to you when you think, I saw this cup. You're not dealing with an external object, but a mental object, a representational form. Thank you, Debbie. Since the cup perception is already a thing of the past and is no longer present in front of you, what about when you are presently looking at a cup? This doesn't help us, at least as long as we accept the theory of momentariness. So we're seeing something from the past, and we're not experiencing something directly. We're experiencing something that is no longer present. And so that further undermines the argument of our perceiving things proves that they're externally present. So then he goes into an interesting division within the Yogacara mind-only tradition. On the bottom of that page, well, first he says, Yogacaras therefore argue whichever one of the arguments you use, we always draw a blank. And for this reason, the position of mind only is established. And that reminded me when I went to a program where Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche was explaining the Chandrakirti's introduction to the middle way. There's a whole section where he encounters the middle way. The mind-only school, refutes that. And Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche went on at quite some time, saying how the mind-only tradition is extremely logically difficult to refute. It is incredibly subtle. And when they would have debates between Madhyamaka and mind-only, almost always the mind-only debater would win. It was really hard for anybody to defeat a mind-only debater. And he said their logic is just very convincing. So within the Yogacara, at the bottom of 173, there was considerable discussion about the degree of reality to be described to the internal representational form, akara. So he mentioned that in the paragraph before, in the middle. He says, "But yeah, when you think I saw this cup, you're not dealing with an external object, but with a mental object, a representational form." And this is the way that perception is said to happen in the Sautrantika tradition, which gets picked up by actually both the Madhyamaka and the Yogacara traditions, is that we perceive the internal representation in our sense faculties, in our sensory network of phenomena. And the Sautrantikas believed that there were external reference to those phenomena, and obviously, as we're going through, the mind only believed there were not, but they both held that there were these internal representations within the sensory network that were sort of real, so to speak, in the sense of being verifiable, experienceable, sort of conventionally real. Whereas for Chittamantras, external objects are not conventionally real for all the reasons we've been going through. For some reason, they got into a debate about what's the existential status or the ontological status of these internal representations. How real are these internal representations? There was considerable discussion in the last paragraph on 173 within Yogacara about the degree of reality to be described to the representational forms. We find this distinction between schools that believe perceptual cognition to take place via representational forms, and those that deny the place of such a form in epistemology. Sakaravada, those who teach the true nature of the forms, and those who hold to the absence of the akara. So sa-akara is the sort of positive akara, and nira akara vada is the negative of those.
But sorry, can I just confirm? In this case, what the distinction there is whether or not there is that representational form at all, right? Not whether not its ontological status or whatever, but just that's the one that distinguishes like the Vaibhashikas from the Sautantrikas, right?
Thank you. Yes, sorry, I confused that. Yeah, we haven't yet got to the issue I was talking about. Thank you very much for clarifying that, Cynthia. So here was just saying, there's those who don't believe in the internal representation, such as the Vaibhashikas, who believed that there was direct access between the senses and external objects. And apparently the Nyaya as well held that there was direct cognition. The Sakaravada, saying that perception happens through an akara, and an internal representation is divided into two positions, depending on the view they take concerning the nature of the akara. One considers representational forms to be true, satya, the other false, alika. What precisely this division between these two takes on representational form amounts to is not entirely clear. Like, if there's this internal representation and you've dispensed with external objects, to argue whether that representational form is true or false, what does that mean? What are they saying?
Yeah, actually, what I found was like the question of calling it a representational form. That name doesn't make sense anymore, because essentially, in this way, it's really more of a mental projection, it's not representing something external. It's just like a vision or whatever, right? But so that
It's true.
term is slightly wrong.
But I think they still want to be able to distinguish between true and false beliefs within their scheme, right? So
right, they're
you could be having a hallucination.
Literally.
It could be a hallucination or a mirage or an illusion, in which you have a case of mistaken perception that can be existing within a mind-only model, right? So you're mistaken about what you're perceiving, even though it's all mental, versus not being fooled by the illusion or the mirage, which is that can all exist within a mind-only space.
Yeah, that's pretty complicated to, yeah, question whether there's, uh, whether it's a wrong perception when you've generated it from your mind. But,
Mhm.
but is that what they're talking about here, or were they just talking about, does this thing,
I think
does the
they're
Akara
talking
exist or
about
not
the
exist?
they're talking about the representations, I think, globally, like are as a class of entities, are they real or not?
Right.
But I think that part of the motivation for doing that has to do with wanting to preserve the notion of truth within a Yogacara context.
The notion of truth. Wh- Yeah, I guess I'm not clear what you mean by the notion of truth here.
Well, okay, so I mean,
Sorry to be dense.
yeah. Let's shift gears slightly and think of it maybe not as all mentally generated, but a different type of world that is without physical basis. Let's say a computer simulation, right? Um, and different beings living in the computer simulation can have views that are right or wrong about the simulation that they're perceiving. Yeah. We're both in the Matrix together, and I'm performing a magic trick, and you're fooled by the magic trick, but I'm not, right? Um, the point being, you don't need material basis, physical matter, in order for a belief to be true or false, right?
Yeah, I guess the question is what determines the basis for true and false? I mean, here, I thought they were talking about the question of whether it's real or not. As, I mean, is there a difference between whether it's real and whether it's true in terms of what you're talking about? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I guess it depends what you mean. Yeah, it's sort of a semantic distinction at this point, but I think the point is misperception. Um, that misperception is possible. I mean, the whole Buddhist scheme, right, is about we're misperceiving things, and that's causing us to suffer. And we may be misperceiving external things in a material world, that the Abhidharmakas believed, or we may be misperceiving mental events that arise from the foundational consciousness. Nevertheless, in both cases, that misperception is leading to our continual spinning around samsara.
That I think I would agree with. The question is the misperception about whether things, exist are real or not. That's what I think, a lot of the, we have this misperception of things as existing, whether it's, the question of self-existing or the question of, in this case, we're talking about whether external things exist. But then here we're just talking about also the question of just these akaras, right, which are just that which we actually perceive with our mind. Do those exist? That's what I thought they were talking about here.
Right, but I think that conversation is made important because they want to preserve a notion of truth and a notion of accurate perception within the context of mind only.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I think I didn't catch that part here, but uh, that's okay.
That may be my own misperception.
I guess in a way, the paragraph that I'm looking at here, the one that says, since the Yogacarans deny the existence of external objects, it's not immediately obvious what role the notion of truth could play for them. If there's nothing out there that this Akara representational form represents, what does accuracy mean, right? That's what they're kind of saying. How could it do so more or less accurately if there's no thing other than the Akara?
Yeah, because even in the case of a magic trick, you doing the magic trick are external to me. So you're not there. So you can't be right, real or not real because you're not there. You're external.
Yeah, but it's still about your relationship with your perception. You can be
No, no,
accurately.
but I can't be accurately perceiving something if it's not there, or inaccurately perceiving it. Perception assumes there's something to see. Perception is fundamentally dualistic, and this is not. If you say there's nothing out there, there can't be a.
No, well, that I don't think that's quite right because there's the notion of an internal representation, which is being perceived, right?
That sort
But
of
again,
seems like an infinite regress.
right, well, the problem is, again, calling that a representation,
Right.
I believe, is a questionable use of terms, because if I understand correctly, essentially it's not a representation, it's essentially it's a display of the mind.
Because there's not something seeing and something being seen. Whether it's internal or external or whatever, there's you can't make that distinction.
Well, although I think in the um no, I think that one way of understanding this, even in a mind only context, or even in the, is that our consciousness has a way of playing this little dualistic trick of splitting its experience into a seeming subject and a seeming object, even though it's all within the mind.
Yes.
Not very convincing.
Well, I think the idea is the Alaya Vijnana, spits out these seeds. Those
Right,
get filtered.
but the Alaya Vijnana doesn't actually exist, nor do the seeds, because those are external.
This feels very Madhyamaka.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is
Oh, wait. Why are you saying Alaya Vijnana is external?
because whatever is perceiving this is not the Alaya Vijnana. The seventh consciousness mistakes the Alaya Vijnana for self. The mind makes thoughts and all this. They're making all these things that aren't there and can't be there. And yes, it is a Madhyamaka argument because, I mean, I guess the struggle I have with Yogacara going forward is okay. So Nagarjuna puts forth this Madhyamaka thing and says you can't take any dualistic concept, idea, whatever, and have it hold. It's just not going to be internally consistent. It's not going to work. And after, I don't know if Yogacara actually comes after, but sort of if you think of it as a response, the response isn't Nagarjuna's not right. That you actually can establish something, even though Nagarjuna says you can't. That's not their response. Their response is saying, well, if you take that, then people will become nihilistic. But no, to my knowledge, nobody east or west has ever proved Nagarjuna wrong. And if you start from there, the rest of this, there's not really anywhere to go.
Well, there is appearance. There is, you know,
Yes, but
I
there's
think
there, there's
Nagarjuna and I think the Yogacaran's point is that appearance needs to be accounted for, and understanding the relationship between emptiness and how things appear to us is something
but
that.
Nagarjuna would say that's pointless and in fact impossible. Because that assumes that there's this experience happening and there's somebody here who's trying to understand and explain it. Understanding, explaining, knowing, any of those things are impossible under the Madhyamaka.
And yet Nagarjuna teaches a path.
No, he doesn't. Not in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. He does not.
Sure, but he wrote more than one text, right?
We don't know that.
He wrote the Ratnavali, which is extensive conversation about the path.
We don't. I mean, so two things. One, we don't actually know that, but two,
Okay.
there's a difference between saying I'm not going to follow that because it leads to a bad place. Versus, I think what Nagarjuna's path is about is what do you do with your mind and your experience in order to prepare yourself to understand what Nagarjuna is saying and to have direct experience of what Nagarjuna is saying. So it's a path toward that. And it doesn't make sense to me that that path would include constructing notions like the Alaya Vijnana. That's just making more things, which I don't see how that's going to lead you to being able to accept that that whole process of making things is kind of nonsense.
So what it seems like you're saying is there's an approximation of what's out there. And some people say, okay, approximation's good enough. There's something out there. And then when you get to Manyamaka, they're saying it's just an approximation. Make a leap. You got to make a leap from there. Like, oh, I'm just seeing approximations. Well, what is reality? What is self? And yeah, but most people don't make that leap. They're just, oh, it's an approximation. There's something there, and that's where they stop.
Well, I think that notion of that I'm here and there's something there that I'm either seeing for real or seeing as an approximation, either of those would not be acceptable from a Madhyamaka perspective.
But
Right, exactly.
okay,
And
I
there's
so
agree.
nothing there, and there's nothing here. There's just bare experience.
okay, but and I would agree with you that in some ways, adding on these extra consciousnesses and things like that is drawing lines in the sand that, you know, it's structures that don't truly exist in one sense. They're just ways of trying to explain experience. I mean, that's the way I understand them. So, and in the same way, I mean, I think that it's that Nagarjuna, I guess, didn't really try to explain experience.
Well, because he didn't believe that was possible or useful.
Right. So,
Because that's not. So I think his approach is not to figure out how to explain experience, for some purpose, but rather to figure out how to live with the fact that you can't explain experience. How to realize and accept that and be enlightened.
right.
But am I misremembering that a few weeks ago you were talking about reading the Garjuna and having no idea what to do with it and how to take it on the path and at a
Yeah,
loss for Nagarjuna's
right.
over
And no,
here and
no,
I'm
no,
over here and how
absolutely.
do how do I bridge the gap?
I'm not saying that the Yogacaras are wrong, that it's hard to do anything with it. What I am saying is that's very different than they're proving him wrong. That's just saying here's a thing, we don't know what to do with this.
They're not,
And
are they trying to prove him wrong? I mean,
well,
I,
if they're introducing all these things and saying, they're dividing it into Netarta and Nitarta or whatever it
hmm.
is, and they're saying that, the Buddha really meant that there is an Ali Vajnana, that's nonsense from a Madhyamaka perspective. That's
But are
absolute
but are
nonsense.
they saying that the Alaya Vijnana is substantially existent?
They're not saying it's substantially existent, but that they're saying that it's a thing and that the Buddha proclaimed it and he didn't.
So, I mean, I think if you take the skillful means view of this, though, it's like Nagarjuna had a very particular skillful means of, taking things apart and showing the absurdity of things. That doesn't work for everybody, so you have to have other skillful means that work for other beings, right? And so
Well,
I
I
think
would
that's
argue
part of,
I would argue, at least within the context of Mula Yamakaraka. I mean, yes, he does using skillful means, but it's not skillful means that anybody can use, I don't think. I mean,
but
if
what Nagarjuna does,
I mean, in the
of
Mula
course it's skillful means.
Karaka, not necessarily some of the other things that are attributed to him, but in that particular document, he's not saying here's something you can do. It's just saying any attempt you make to explain or understand anything will ultimately be internally inconsistent and fail. That's all he's saying. And
But
that's not a means. That's
I,
just
I,
a
I
statement.
I would call that it's a skillful means of sorts because it by pulling the rug out from under all kinds of assumptions, it has the potential for opening our minds further.
It does, but it just doesn't offer any help with that.
It's hard. No, I agree,
Yeah.
but I would still definitely call it skillful means.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It is skillful means in his ability to recognize that and to put it in a way that others can at least intellectually understand. That's an enormous achievement that I'm not aware anybody else anywhere else has done. No, I don't mean to downplay that. I'm just saying normally when you think of skillful means it's something that somebody did to sort of help you along the path. And this is really just sort of saying that's the end of the path and you're here.
I think all of these can help. You know, again, it's for the right person, it can help you on the path.
Yeah.
For the wrong person, yeah, won't do anything. You got to find something else.
I just think unlike most other skillful means, the right person is very, very rare.
And the other thing is, it's not like it may not get people all the way on their path. And
Right.
it's true that I guess it could get some people feeling very stuck as well. It's true. But I do think that it has a way of, it can kind of sweep away the cobwebs.
Yeah, yeah.
Our
But I mean,
message.
I guess so my question for the Yogacara approach is yes. So Nagarjuna has said these things and it points out a particular um internal inconsistency in the way we deal with things and so forth. And so the question then is, okay, what do you do since almost nobody can just realize or experience that? I don't suspect. How do you get them from that to where they do? And I find the Yogacara sort of a strange way of doing it because it's building more and more and more stuff between emptiness and our experience.
It's like, how dare you clutter up having cleaned all that away, how dare you clutter it up with all this extra stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, as
Well,
opposed to figuring out ways to like, see that things are empty and to um and to abide in that recognition.
I think probably one of the most convincing and pervasive delusions we have is that of an external world. That, there's a there out there. And Yogacara may be a skillful means in deconstructing that very sort of inborn delusion. And notions such as Alaya Vijnana and the other seven consciousness may be useful fictions in order to get to that point where our conviction in the external world is dismantled. It,
It
it and
it
I think the point that the synthesizers who seek to bring Yogacara and Madhyamaka together in a more explicit way will make that point that Yogacara is a step on the way to the Madhyamaka realization.
Yeah, and I mean it's very possible that that is an effective way to do that. I'm in no position to say, but it would be counterintuitive that adding more sort of mental and intellectual apparatus between emptiness and our experience doesn't seem like the way to get to the fact that there actually is no difference there. And
So,
so
so are
that
you saying that you think like the idea of a useful fiction is pointless after Nagarjuna?
no, I'm not saying that necessarily. I'm saying this kind of useful fiction. I don't from my perspective isn't effective. But again, maybe it is for others. I don't know. But one of the things I think that's actually kind of ironic is using a Madhyamaka logic, it's very easy to say, yeah, there's no external anything. You know, external objects don't exist or not exist. How could they? I mean, it's sort of just a given. The I think the concern from a Madhyamaka perspective is saying that there's nothing external reifies the internal.
I can,
And that's potentially dangerous.
well, it's just getting back to okay, even if they say there's nothing external, then what is being, there's again the question of what's this experience thing that's going on.
And that's the source, which is they're
But
saying is Pali Vishnana is the source, or before that, they're saying the skandhas, which is a heap, and
But
that's what Morgan's
but I
trying to
think
say. You keep going down that path, how are you getting to emptiness?
because yeah, I think that where the rubber hits the road with Yamaka is right at that point where you say, okay, so there's this stuff going on. Anything after that is to miss the point. I need to understand it. I need it explained. I need to know how it works. I need to know that it's there or that it's not there. Any of that is to miss the point. You just have to stop there and abide,
So you would like my bumper sticker,
which
the
is
happens, don't try to explain it.
something like that. Yeah. And to go back to the Big Lebowski for a second, one of the things I find interesting is if you've ever met a nihilist and you've ever actually talked to them and tried to, what you end up finding is what they actually believe is that nothing exists but them.
So it becomes solipsistic, is that the word?
I guess. And I mean, I think, and that's kind of how I find Yogacara.
Oh, that's interesting. Hmm.
Solipsism, I mean, was a real issue that Yogacara had to contend with. And there, if you want to read more about that, there's an interesting section on it earlier in this chapter in the Westerhoff book, where actually some later Yogacara authors seem to fully endorse the notion of solipsism.
Mhm.
And I think also may come back to this issue of sort of the veracity of internal representations, right? So normally we can tell if something's true if someone else agrees with you, but if everything's internal and there's no one else to kind of check with, how comprehensible is that notion? Derek, can you get us back on track?
Well, you actually just did it. You brought us full circle back to where we had spun off, right? Well done.
We're social beings, and we make each other suffer because we're social beings.
So Derek's playing the silent one this time.
We are still in your section. I am not taking over.
Have you any insights, Derek, after all this?
No, I think that's it for the non-existence of external phenomena. Let's go into the Alaya Vijnana with Chris.
All right. I'm gonna let's see, what page does that be? I'm like, what about do you not want to talk about ontology versus epistemology?
No, but
No?
you're
Okay.
welcome to.
Well, I think I will then, because that felt really important to me. Um, so this is let's go to the top of page 176.
Do me a
And in
favor that if there's a header,
in the margins, we have, is Yogacara a form of idealism?
great, thank you.
Cool. And I'm just going to read this. I'm just going to read that paragraph. We now have some idea how Yogacara can be understood as arising out of a Sautrantika representationalism. Yet, we might still be unsure what kind of theory Yogacara is. In fact, what exactly the Yogacara position amounts to is still a matter of debate. One way of understanding it is simply as a denial of the Rupa Skandha, as the thesis that there are no material objects. Others claimed that the Yogačara's aim was not primarily ontological, but that its proponents were more interested in epistemological matters, and did not consider themselves to be in the business of defending a uniquely correct theory of ontology. The first interpretation is usually what one has in mind when referring to Yogacara as a form of idealism. Skipping to the next paragraph. On the other hand, understanding what precisely the non-idealist understanding of Yogacara amounts to is not a straightforward matter. The best interpretations of this reading seem to be the claim that Yogacara authors were not seeking to provide the ontological statement that there were no material objects, but simply wanted to establish the epistemological statement that we have no good evidence for assuming that there are such things. So the distinction here, as we've been talking about, is on one hand an ontological claim that mind only is all that exists, and on the other hand, the epistemological claim that mind only is all that we can perceive, all that we have access to. There may well be a so-called external world out there, but we have no way of perceiving it. And as we mentioned earlier, the distance between these two ideas may not be that great. And he talks about Vasubandhu's a Vasubandhu text where he shows in detail, bottom of that same page 176, shows in because the self, and this is using another example of a thing that cannot be perceived. Because the self is neither perceivable or inferable, as Vasubandhu shows in detail, and because the Buddha's teaching in this respect need to be understood in relation to the specific context in which they were made, there is no route through epistemic instruments or pramana that leads to the self. If we are justified in concluding that Vasubandhu's position in the Abhidharmakasha something is that there is no substantial self, can we not similarly conclude, at least in the Vimsika, he wants to defend the position that there are no external objects? After all, in this text, Vasubandhu points out the various ways in which our epistemic instruments appear to provide evidence for external objects do not actually provide any evidence at all. By appeal to the principle that we are justified to infer that there is no X if there is no evidence for X, we are able to move from the epistemological reading of Yogacara to the ontological interpretation. So this is all to say that without any evidence within our perception for the existence of an external world, or anything to infer that there is an external world, we have no reason to conclude that there is one at all. So in this case, the epistemic argument leads to an ontological conclusion. We could give sort of an example of we've never perceived of unicorns, and even though there's talk of unicorns, we don't have any reason to believe that talk is authoritative. So because there's no direct perception or reason for inference or appeal to authority, we have no reason to think that unicorns exist. Saying the same thing in this case about the external world. And then he talks about how this has become nevertheless, this epistemic argument has become very trendy among contemporary scholars, and how that has a lot to do with our own sort of contemporary concerns, and that idealism within philosophical circles is very much seen as discredited. And, we live in a really sort of materialist zeitgeist, and that we shouldn't superimpose the philosophical flavor of the day onto Yogacara. So, moving on to the Alaya Vijnana, I wanted to share a little graphic that I made for another class at some point. Y'all seeing this? There's some sort of mixture of Tibetan and Sanskrit here. I think this was using the language that Chogyam Trungpa uses in the Profound Treasury. But we have the 8 consciousnesses here, and the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, as a base of sorts, out of which the Jnani, the instigator of kleshas, the also known as the defiled mind, the klista manas in Sanskrit. And then we have the yi, the mental consciousness, and out of that comes the five sense consciousnesses. So there's this idea of a progression of this sort of mind stream of the coming out of the Alaya Vijnana, being mistaken by the Klista Manas as a self, and then filtered through the sense consciousnesses. First the mental, then the five sense consciousnesses. So that's the scheme. It's fairly straightforward, and there's a few sort of reasons why this scheme was adopted, in addition to just creating more concepts that you'll have to dismantle later. And the first is the idea of mental, I guess what we would call discontinuity. So normally one mind moment leads to the next, and that's how consciousness is sort of perpetuated, right? But there are examples of occasions such as deep sleep and also meditative states in which the sense consciousnesses dissolve, and then later come back online. Within Abhidharma scheme, this is very difficult to explain. Because everything goes from one moment to the next. If something goes fully offline, how could it re-arise? What could cause it to re-arise? So the storehouse consciousness becomes a very useful explanatory device for how the sense consciousnesses and ego consciousness could come back after disappearing during moments of deep meditation, deep sleep. Derek, did you want to chime in?
No.
No. Okay. The other reason for introducing a notion, and maybe one that feels even more important, is creating an accounting of karma. So we have all sorts of things we're told about karma, about how an event can happen now, and the karmic seed of it lies latent for lifetimes even before finally ripening. And there's a question of how, on a schematic level, how that would really work. Again, if because of the theory of momentariness, if things come in and out of existence with every single moment, how could something that was not active perpetuate itself into the future and then arise later? The Alaya Vijnana becomes a place for those karmic potentials to lay dormant before they ripen. I think that's probably all that needs to be said about the Alaya Vijnana, unless you have anything you'd like to add to that, Derek.
No, it's a nice story, as Morgan said, and it only if you understand it as saying that these are real, then that is a mistaken understanding, and these are fictional. I think it's clear that they're presenting these as fictional explanations of experiences. So why don't you go continue with Three Natures, Chris? I already did Three Natures last week and the Samdiner motion.
Okay, great. There actually, I actually am reminded of another thing I wanted to mention about the Ali Vijnana, which is in the next section. It's on page 188, and the little marginalia note, Cynthia, is transformation of the basis. And we have the idea that that I'll just read this. More specifically, in the Yogacara context, we find the idea that the eradication of defilements or kleshas required for obtaining liberation brings with it a transformation of the basis. There are different ways of understanding what this transformation amounts to. It is sometimes said to consist of the elimination of the foundational consciousness that contains the karmic potentialities responsible for the continued appearance of cyclic existence. Sometimes the focus is on the eradication of the latent badness inherent in the Alaya Vijnana itself. And if the Alaya Vijnana is seen as more than simply another term for this collection of bad potentialities, we can conceive of the emergence of an understanding of the transformation of the basis as one according to which the defilements and unwholesome karmic seeds contained in the Alaya Vijnana are removed, leaving behind an undefiled consciousness, Amala Vijnana. It is only a short step from this idea. This is only a short step from this to the idea of an originally pure nature of the mind was present all along, and that bringing this nature to light is what liberation consists in. So this is connecting the idea of the Alaya Vijnana to the path, and understanding as the Alaya Vijnana is a container of good and bad karma, its purification, the path amounts to its purification. There is then a question of what is left, but is the Alaya Vijnana completely dissolved, or is it purified? And in some cases, you have this idea of the purified Alaya Vijnana turns into the Tathagata Garbha. So I just wanted to mention that as another aspect of the Alaya Vijnana. Okay, so Tri Swabhava.
So before you go there, it's interesting to think about the Yogacara as a alternative to the Abhidharma, instead of trying to think of it as anything more progressive than that or more advanced than that. If you look at the Abhidharma has all these things. So it has a scheme of 6 consciousnesses. Yogacara has 8. Not a big, they're just schemes. Abhidharma has this idea that there's external objects, forms, and internal sense perceivers that experience those forms. So they have a whole setup of description of experience. Yogacara has its description of experiences, it being some internal thing, and they both have a description of how does karma happen. In the Abhidharma, there's the latent tendencies, the acquisition of tendencies that happens in the karmic continuum of the person not being a self, but the continuum of the skandhas. So they have this really clunky description of how does karma function. The Yogacara, they have their description, which is equally clunky, there's this big storehouse and there's seeds and they lie dormant and then suddenly they awaken. And, this idea that the Alaya Vijnana explains how you can remember who you are after you come out of cessation samadhi, because the Alaya Vijnana is a series of moments of consciousness. All of the other consciousnesses are series of moments of consciousness too. So maybe you say, they flip between mental to visual to mental to auditory, and so the Alaya Vijnana maybe is a continuous stream of the same that creates a sense of continuity. But are those put together? When you're out of Nirodha Samapati and you're having visual and mental consciousness and Alaya Vijnana consciousness is happening at the same time, what does that mean that there's all these consciousnesses happening at the same time? The Abhidharma system said there's only one consciousness happening at any one time. And Yogacara is basically saying there's 2. There's this ongoing stream of alaya vijnana consciousness, which is subconscious. So they're trying to explain like subconscious experience and how there's constant subconscious experience with conscious experience at the same time. And, so they come up with these elaborate systems for explaining our experience. And I think they're basically identical descriptions, identical like in their import and their utility, and the details of their schemes are very minor nuances. And in both cases, Nagarjuna comes through and says, none of this makes any sense on an ultimate level. And then, as you're all saying, and Morgan, you more than anyone, so then what? What do you do then? And then they each give a different description of the path based on their own systems. The Nagarjuna's system of the path is identical to the Abhidharma framework. And he talks about purifying karma and generating meritorious karma, which makes no sense in the scheme of emptiness. And the Yogacharans talk about this transformation of the eighth consciousness where occurs when you purify all the bad seeds. I mean, like, there must be a lot of bad seeds in there. How would you possibly purify all of them? That would take a very long time. So both of them make no sense at all. But Nagarjuna, it's sort of like whether a person named Nagarjuna wrote the Karikas and also something else doesn't matter. We have this view presented by one text, which is clearly the ultimate view of reasoning. And then you have various skillful means, presentations of what now, which evolve over time and gradually become more and more just like, how do you meditate? As opposed to like bringing in these complicated schemes of ontological structures and this and that. But like the whole thing of the timing also like puzzles me. It's like the Yogacharya, they don't seem to know about the Karikas at all. It's like they operate completely oblivious to it. Is it possible that they were actually oblivious to the Karikas and they're just like, taking the next step on the Abhidharma framework and presenting like some explanation and then some like what now? And it just seems that the Karikas, to say like, why create all these other things after the Karikas? It's sort of like, the Abhidharmas, they flourished for hundreds of years after the Karikas appeared, and their blossoming happened at around 500. Buddhaghosa and other ones, so they weren't stopped by the Karikas, their effort, so it's like there's these trends that went on somewhat independently, and they just continued. And the fact that they were not describing ultimate reality didn't seem to bother them. Anyway.
But I think it's also important to mention that, and as you mentioned earlier, there are documented debates that happened between these two traditions. And maybe not at the beginning. It could be that they developed separately and then at a certain point started debating each other when they were, relatively established traditions. But it's not as though the Yogacharans, upon encountering Madhyamaka at whatever point, were like, oh, geez, you got it right. And were completely acquiescing to your point of view. That there was a considerable amount of discourse and exchange. Maybe not at the beginning, but at a certain point.
it's interesting that the debates, I don't think the debates happen until later, but I'd be curious to find out when they were happening. And at the same time, you have like these Yogacara so-called sutras appearing. Like, where did they come from? What what's up with them? Like around the time of the Prajnaparamitas or slightly later. I don't know. It's all sort of curious. Cynthia.
Thanks, and it's helpful. And while you were doing that overview, one of the things that I noticed actually, I mean, in one sense, you were saying that the progression from one to the next wasn't a big change, but I did notice one thing that was interesting in terms of the from the Vaibhashika to the Sautantrika to the Yogacara, when you were talking about the perceptual part, that they're, small changes in one sense, that's true. I'm not arguing with that. But what I realized was it is interesting that in each case, there was a little step that in between the Vaibhashikas and the Sautantrikas, you have the difference of the idea of direct perception. You actually directly perceive that external thing, right? And then in the Sautantrika, you introduce the aspect or the akara or whatever, that you're not seeing that. And then in the Yogacara, you're taking away the external altogether. So that's kind of like that's three. It kind of clicked for me that there's a little three-step process that is going further and further from that externality, which was kind of interesting. Um,
Yeah, it definitely is like a continuation of the Abhidharma project, much more than an attempt to describe the ultimate nature of things. And maybe you can say, well, Nagarjuna, they felt, yeah, Nagarjuna did that in the Karakas, and yet it's still helpful to try to describe the relative.
yeah, it's like they don't just pack up and go home because somebody had a different way of explaining, or well, of not explaining things. Yeah, I mean, if you have one person who won't explain anything, and
Or one person like identified this is the ultimate, and there's no arguing with that. Like, why debate that text? You can't, as
yes,
we've
maybe
all
it's just
said.
accepting that, but there's still, I mean, you could either say, all right, we accept that and we all just
How do
shut
we
up,
work with mind?
you know,
Yeah, how do we work with mind?
you either say shut up and,
Does
or you say, okay, there's still stuff to talk about while we're practicing.
right, right. Like, how do we approach practice, and does the understanding of our mind and our experience inform our practice? And clearly, both systems have that point of view, the Abhidharma and the Yogacara, that the understanding of the way the mind functions and experience happens informs their practice.
And I
So
also just,
it's
yeah, I also wanted to say, Chris, I appreciate your little diagram because in a way it does help, one of my projects over the last, I don't know, many months has been trying to really grok what they mean by, because basically the perceptual process as you learn it from the early tenant systems is this whole thing of, there's the first, what is it, the first sensory perception is direct, and then there's all these different steps, and it's all going from that outer thing to our inner experience, right? So we're used to thinking about it that way, from outside to inside. And so what your diagram is attempting to do, in a sense, is to illustrate the flip of that. And the reason I have obsessed over this, or in recent years, whatever, is that I find it very frustrating in many contexts where they're talking about a more ultimate point of view where there isn't externality and that doesn't exist, and yet they still tend to use the terminology of perception, which always drives me a little crazy because I'm like, why don't they talk purely if there really isn't anything out there, or if we're really talking about this all being a display from the mind, why don't they find different words to convey that? And often I find that it gets mixed. I don't know if you've experienced that also, that there isn't a kind of a precision about that often. So I think it
it's
is helpful
interesting.
yeah.
And the thing with the Akara and the Satya Akaras and uh, the Alika Kara, Satya Alika Kara, whatever, the true and the false. I think it comes down to those who hold that the uh, paratantra is like something, like that the dependent nature has a pure quality to it, and they have a reification and their existential or ontological view of the true nature of mind as being truly existent as a pure phenomenon. And the ones that hold the aspect to be false are those that view the paratantra to be the empty, the parinishpana, the fully perfected nature, to be the emptiness of the paratantra, the dependent nature. Whereas the earlier Yogacara views the ultimate, completely perfected, to be the transformation of the dependent nature by virtue of eliminating the conceptual. So those end up being two different streams of the thing there. The problem I love the diagram, except the problem I have with it is I always think of the Alaya Vijnana as encompassing all the others, and it's sort of like you have this sense perceptions encompassing the Alaya Vijnana, and I would have the Alaya Vijnana as the larger thing, and then each circle subsequent, the other circles as being the smaller ones, and just flip it in that way.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. And
It's
I've seen
beautiful.
somewhere they also deal with, they bring in that immediate mind, or the two parts of the seventh is another
Oh
little.
my God, that gets complicated. Yeah, we'll come to that later. Yeah, that's
I'll see if I can find the diagram that I saw of that. One of the Kenpos came up with
yeah.
that.
Well, Trungpa Rinpoche has a very, he does the transformation into the wisdoms, and he has that chart that splits them very clearly. But
Yeah.
anyway, let's go on. We have a few more minutes. You want to revisit the three natures, Chris?
Yeah, so you just gave us sort of a preview of that, how those schemes work, how different versions of those different schemes map onto those three natures and the path as well. Um, so the three natures, this is page 182, section header Tri Swabhava. The three natures are the imputed nature, the Parikalpita Swabhava, the dependent nature, the Paratantra Swabhava, and the perfected nature, the Parishnishpana Swabhava. A common way of explaining the distinction between them is by reference to a mirage seen in the desert. The imputed nature corresponds to the water the deluded traveler sees, while the dependent nature corresponds to what underlies the illusory appearance, a combination of air at different temperatures and the light waves refracted by it. The perfected nature is simply the fact that there is no real water anywhere and the combination of causal factors that underlie the illusory appearance. I'm just gonna skip ahead. What's interesting
Yes.
is, yeah.
If you felt that I covered it already, you could go on to Swasam Vedana if you want. But otherwise, just keep going where you were.
Well,
I
I
have
was,
a short question.
yeah.
Did anybody, I had a slight issue with the use of mirage as the analogy, because it seems like, because of the fact that that water doesn't exist at all, even in the real situation, the seemingly real situation, it seemed like it wasn't a great example, because, like, it seems like what you want to be talking about is, okay, there's what we perceive as water, and that is dependent on all sorts of other things. And so ultimately, it isn't real, water is the imposition. But in the case of mirage, it's not quite the same, because, if you know what I mean, that puts an extra little trick in it. That
It seems to imply that the dependent nature or it seems to, if we take the dependent nature to be light and sand and heat, it seems to imply that those are real things, and only the display of the mirage is false. Uh, Whereas I think what you're saying is that the conceptual imputations such as sand and heat and air are also imaginary nature.
Right. So I felt like that's slightly not the best analogy. It was sort of using this, it adds an extra layer that could actually make it harder to see the point. I just wondered if anybody else noticed that. It kind of slightly disturbed me, but
I think it's helpful because we all accept that mirages aren't real, and that's that having that level of unreality easily graspable is sort of an entry point into understanding. I don't know.
yeah,
It's all skillful means, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. No, I mean,
to
I'm
Morgan's
not
point,
saying
you
it's
can't say
terrible.
anything about anything. So
I'm just,
yeah, anything you say about anything is going to be misleading, and we can disagree about which is more or less misleading. I was very interested in what's on the next page, mapping the three natures onto the two truths. Um, so obviously we know the two truths from the Madhyamaka scheme, ultimate and relative. Um, and this is the middle of that second paragraph. One way of comparing them is by identifying the conventional truth with the imagined nature and the ultimate truth with the dependent nature, with the perfected nature being simply the fact that the relations between the two, that is, the fact that conventionally imputed truth is in fact nowhere to be found once analysts investigating the ultimate truth is applied. And a little further down, another option. So that's the Madhyamaka perspective. And then a little further down from the Yogacara perspective, the three natures would instead present an account according to which there is a basis of appearance, the dependent nature, that exists conventionally, as well as an inconceivable ultimate reality, the perfected nature. The Yogacara can respond to what he considers to be conceptually problematic non-foundationalist assumptions of the Madhyamaka, that is, appearances all the way down. The appearances themselves, the imagined nature, can be considered to be strictly non-existent, but this does not entail that there cannot be a sufficiently real conventional nature that grounds all appearances, though it is not itself an appearance. So that distinction proposes from the Yogacara point of view that there is some sort of shared reality upon which appearances are based, perhaps, which obviously the Madhyamaka is going to reject. Derek, do you want to move on briefly?
Oh, let's see. Swasamvedana. What do people think of this idea that there's simultaneous self-awareness and object awareness in every moment of awareness? And he tries to explain this on the page 185. He's like in the third paragraph. You can only remember what you've experienced at an earlier time. Otherwise, you're just dealing with a pseudo-memory, psychological illusion. Let's say there's the memory of cognizing the cup at an earlier time, but at the time your experience was not that of cognizing a teacup. It was just an experience of a teacup. This experience demands that you remember something you did not experience. Do you get what he's getting at? That if there's no awareness of cognizing something, then when you're remembering it, you're remembering something you're not cognizing. If that makes any sense. Because the cup is not present. The only thing that can be present is the memory of cognizing the cup. Does that hold water? Does that hold tea for you guys?
well, it did make me kind of wonder, just, it seemed like it was, by talking about it in terms of memory, it raises the question of what is memory, and in terms of, as opposed to this reflexive awareness.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Memory is not well explained in the Buddhist tradition.
Yeah, because
There's a,
I went through all this, and it bent my mind a little, and that's where I couldn't quite, at a certain point I realized I don't know what the difference is between, how would they define memory in general? if there are questions, you know, if
Yeah. So memory is the re-arising in the sixth consciousness of a prior experience of an external. No, it could be of any consciousness, right? You
right,
could have
internal,
remembering that I thought of something.
yeah, right. Remembering a dream would be a, I don't know, that's an internal, anyway, whatever. So remembering is whatever it is, it's remembering. Is that based on this reflexive awareness, or is it the same as or different than?
Yeah. So what what he's saying is, and this example is saying, is that memory doesn't bring back the object; it only brings back your experience of the object, because the object doesn't exist. Even if that was a thought, you know, I remembered this yesterday, and you're bringing back the memory of that. You're bringing back the awareness of the object as opposed to the experience of the object. So from that, they're saying, okay, there's self-awareness in this sense of a relative realm, not necessarily ultimate. It has a significance later on in various traditions, but it's an interesting issue. This idea of self-awareness, and particularly if there's no external objects, then the awareness of your awareness is sort of a key function. We're out of time once again. I am aware that we're at over time. Any last comments, Chris? Are you aware of any last comments?
No, I have no awareness.
No awareness. No teacup. Anyone else? Let us conclude, dedicate the heaps of merit encountered by this morality and omniscience may defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east. May the lotus garden of the victims' wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. We didn't get to, there was one part, but we should just for a second, he quotes the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. That must have really been a painful quote. Where is that?
Bottom of 188.
Thank you. Yeah, so just briefly. Predecessor, it talks about the Tathagata theory. We didn't really get to that. We'll have to come back to that. The Mahaparinirvana Sutra at the very bottom explicitly identifies the Tathagata with Atman and states that the Atman is real. So this is Westerhoff's portrayal of this famous quandary, this like paradoxical thing. All things are not without self. The self is real. It is permanence. It is a quality. It is unchanging. It is firm or stable. It is peace. Like the good milk remedy of the physician, the Tathagata also teaches in accordance with reality. What a bizarre statement that is, isn't that?
Yeah, that was probably the weirdest part of this whole night's reading, I think, was the
Yeah,
section.
Trumper Rinpoche presents it in the Profound Treasury, Volume 2, this little chapter at the end of the emptiness section where he says, Tundam, ultimate truth, has these four qualities. He just like says them, and that's it. He doesn't explain them.
Where is that again? In at the end of which?
Volume 2, at the end of the emptiness chapter,
Oh,
which
thanks.
is before the paramitas,
Right.
emptiness and compassion. Anyway, it's a quandary. It's a mystery. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you. Thank you, Chris. Take care, everyone.
Thank
Just a
you.
reminder that that dun season begins on Saturday, so please be careful.
Ooh. Are they real?
I thought
Or
it
are they
started a
just
while ago, the dawn season.
it's been
Certainly
all
has
year.
felt that way. Yeah.
So we'll
Yeah.
do the Mama Chan next time.
That'd be fun.